Immediately following worship, stay tuned for TalkBack with Andrea Live. For 15 to 20 minutes after online worship, everyone will have the opportunity to express their thoughts, questions, and/or concerns about the subject matter of the morning. This will provide you with an opportunity to connect and gain a deeper understanding of the topics of the day. Just enter your question into the chat room or text your question to 704-343-8955. Questions read during TalkBack will be anonymous. Thanks.
All right. Well, here we are. The first question. Brad, are you going to share it with us?
So we have it's a two-parter. So I'll read the first part and let you guys address it. Can you talk about the power/validity or not of the extra text out there that did not make the canon of Scripture, i.e. the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary, Paul's extra letter, etc.? How should we read those?
So I would say we read him in the same way that I shared earlier, that we use that Wesleyan quadrilateral as we talk about it, about what has tradition said about it, what does our mind, what does experience say. They can teach us something about God, but as the scholars early on wrestled with them, they didn't find them as reliable and valid as the other scriptures.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say too, that there are beautiful parts
Absolutely.
of them, but I think we would look at them with a critical eye, just like we look at all the other scripture.
Okay. And then part two of the same question is also, did God stop talking? Why was Scripture canon halted when it was? Why do we not consider texts written hundreds of years after mystics, theologians, poets as Scripture?
You know, I love that verse of scripture that says if everything that Jesus said had been written down, volumes couldn't contain it. And I think that's the same way with what God says is mystics, others have shared with us more about God. And so God hasn't stopped talking. We have the canon of scripture, but as other people interpret it, we learn a whole lot more about it.
Right. And I think one of the things that I read in prepping for this message was that, no, God did not stop speaking, so we shouldn't discount what modern day or, more ancient theologians or mystics talked about. But because it was close to the time of Christ, and, they wanted to make sure that they got it down, the early followers, and then the canon happened. And since then, we have just respected it and revered it. And then, as time passed, misunderstood it. But, the further we got away from the teachings of Jesus. And, I'd love, Amy, who's your favorite modern-day theologian?
Well, probably Henry Nouwen is one of my favorites.
Okay. And mine's Richard Rohr.
And I read him all the time, too.
So there are people right now that are powerful. We invite you to get any books by Nouwen. It's Nouwen, or Rohr, Rohr. And they have powerful sayings.
Okay. Next question. Why are there so many different versions of the Bible? King James Version, NIV, ESV, NASB.
That's a great question.
It is a good question. I'm sure you've heard that the King James Version is the way Jesus talked. Right?
Oh, exactly. And some churches don't want a preacher unless they are going to use the King James Version.
Right. But I think the word version is important because the Bible came to us through Hebrew and Greek, as I talked about before. And so as we've learned more about ancient Hebrew and Greek, people have translated it. And as they've learned more about biblical times, we've been able to kind of understand more fully what the writers were trying to say. And so I love to read different versions of the Bible because I think it helps me to see passages in different ways.
Right. And there's, words that have nuances. And, that word that I was talking about in 2 Timothy, inspired.
Yeah.
Inspired means a lot of different things. And, we think Paul, it's the only time it's contained in Scripture. He made up that word. What did Paul mean? We have no idea.
Right.
So I think all the translations are good and important. And if you use BibleGateway.com, you can pull them up next to each other and read them. And it's a fascinating learning tool to use. And some of you have asked before, is it not as valid if it's not the King James Version? And
Yeah, and I guess what I think is the King James Version was written a long time ago. I think the newer translations are probably better because we've learned more and we
Right.
understand more. So not that the King James Version is bad, and goodness gracious, I love the Psalms out of that because they're so beautiful and poetic. But I think the other versions, we just learn more and they help us know God a little bit better.
What's your favorite version to read right now to help you understand?
So I go back and forth. I mean, I love to study. When I study the Bible, I use the New Revised Standard Version. And that's just because for me, that's what we studied in seminary, and I think it still is applicable. But then I also love Eugene Peterson's The Message because he just kind of makes me have to think. Having kind of, I know what God's trying to say through this, that Eugene Peterson makes me stop and really think about what God's saying to us today.
Yeah, those are the two I use.
So far, those are the only questions that have come in.
All right. Well, thank you guys for joining in TalkBack, and we'll see you next week.